And we're live after a harrowing experience of tech that has caused me to switch computers. It has caused Kate to not panic, which is always good because I was a little bit panicky. It is Wednesday, September 9th, 2020. 7 p.m. We're kind of late, but if that's a problem for you, watch a different show. There are lots of shows that start on time. This isn't one of them. This is a show that starts as close to 5 as we can manage, consistent with having no tech support, consistent with our own mental health, consistent with the guests showing up, consistent with the tech not deciding not to work. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. If we were allowed to have fun, we would have studios, we would have staff, we would have an endless intravenous supply of bourbon. But we're not allowed to have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we have Carl Bergstrom, who Kate is going to introduce properly, but I just want to say I am really excited about having here because Carl knows a lot about crows, and I am increasingly fascinated by crows and have important crow questions for Carl. So, Kate, why don't you introduce Carl and properly with his actual accomplishments and credentials, and then we will get into the crows.
Okay. So Carl, welcome to the weird and crazy world of In Lieu of Fun. It is so great to have you here. Sorry for the technical difficulties, obviously. So Carl is a professor of biology at the University of Washington, and he is the recent author, co-author of the book Calling Bullshit, which talks about how exactly humans can suss out misinformation and disinformation and kind of in science especially. And if I'm not wrong, Carl, like your work is both kind of like in biology is really around almost kind of what is the term that I learned in my AP biology class of something dictates, phonology dictates, like, or what is the term? What is that phrase? Recapitulates.
Phylogeny.
Yeah.
That is an expression.
Yes. Okay. Well, I screwed that up. But anyways, it sounds a lot like a lot of your biology work kind of maybe has something to do with that, but then also kind of your philosophical work has turned a lot into doing with misinformation, disinformation, and how people learn about science, kind of which is actually fascinating to me because as I chatted with you before, that I've done work with Dan Kahan at Yale Law School, who's also kind of doing work in this area. And so this is a nice juxtaposition of interest, but I would be remiss if I didn't also, that is a perfect alignment with some of the interests of a lot of the people on the show, but I would be remiss if I neglected to talk about, as Ben mentioned, your I don't know, hobby. You're well known on Twitter for posting beautiful pictures of ravens and other corvid. I don't know, is it exclusively ravens?
And whatever I can get in my lens.
And so I just want to say that the Venn diagram juxtaposition of your area of interest of like calling bullshit on things and your interest in crows met when I messaged you and was like, we're really interested in having you come on to talk all about your crow photos. And you're like, is this bullshit? I was like, no, it's not bullshit. Like, we are genuinely interested. Like, people have written in on Saturdays and been like, Carl Bergstrom, have him on. And I'm like, and I was like, which had then sent Ben and I down spirals of watching crow videos. But anyways, we are so happy to have you on today. And this is going to be a really great, even despite the tech, a really great episode, just kind of talking about all the stuff you're working on. So thanks for coming.
Oh, it's great to be here. And I do kind of wonder if maybe there's that's a common overlap in the people that are drawn to the personalities of corvids are also drawn to a sort of skepticism and playfulness about calling BS on things.
So before we get into,
so what is the connection?
What do you mean? What's the connection?
No, I mean, what's the connection between why is it that people who are interested in calling bullshit on things will also tend to be corvid people?
I don't know. I mean, corvids are historically, if you look at where they show up in mythology, they're two things. They're tricksters and they're bringers of wisdom, and so calling bullshit involves elements of each.
Yeah.
And
Ravenclaws.
As well as it's a very old myth. My older kid yesterday sent me a 13th century drawing from an Arabic text of the King of Crows consulting with his ministers and his advisors.
Oh, wonderful.
And
I'd love to see that. Wow.
It's a wonderful picture. I will share it in the... I tweeted it yesterday.
Great.
It's quite lovely. But here's my first crow question. Before we'll get into calling bullshit a little bit later. But my first crow question is, how much of the sense of crows as very smart is true and documentable, and how much of it is just people looking for validation of what's essentially mythological, which is that, these are tricksters and bringers of wisdom. And so we see in crow behavior things that will validate our pre-existing sense of them as very clever. So I have just shared in the image of the image of the King of Crows in the chat. But anyway, that's my first question. Is there actual evidence that crows and ravens are smart?
Wow,
yeah, that's an amazing image.
Yeah. And the ministers look like chuffs. Anyway, so is there actual evidence? Yes, there's sort of everything is. I think pretty much everything, all the stories we tell are documentable, and we're only starting to scratch the surface. That's kind of my sense of things. So there's been amazing work done here at the University of Washington that I'm sure many people have heard about, that John Marsliff and many others working with him have done on how crows identify faces uniquely. And so they wanted to show that it was actually the face that the crows were recognizing, and so they did these very nice experiments where they would wear masks, and there were masks that had been used to trap crows, and then there were masks that were neutral or nice masks, and those masks, they quickly found that the crows could learn to identify the particular masks that had been used to trap crows, and it didn't matter who was wearing it, they would then mob that person. I've worn this mask; it's an amazing experience. And this is sort of a cultural memory that these crows have handed down. I mean, John did this experiment, I don't know now, 15 years ago or something like that. And he once a year he walks around with the mask to see if they still remember. So a couple of years ago, I got to do that and be the guy in the mask. And even though very few of the crows that would have been around when he first did the harassing of crows are even still alive. You put this mask on and you're walking through extremely, I don't know how many people can remember that campuses used to be crowded, but you're walking through an extremely crowded campus in between courses, and all of a sudden they just pick you out, and it's we hear them mobbing, but it's a totally different experience being the target of the mobbing. And then there's just a stream of crows that come at you. So they're phenomenal at recognizing faces. They can recognize gaits too, I'm sure.
And teaching face recognition. I mean, right? It's not.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think that, my guess is they don't have a language that says, gosh, look for the funny looking guy who wears his glasses a little bit bent to the side, and and whatever. But it's more likely that they watch to see what the other crows are mobbing, and so they learn socially that way. But clearly this has been something that has been passed on from the original crows that observed this to subsequent generations of crows. John's even sort of mapped the spread of this meme, and so the meme that you attack this one particular mask is now occurs not only on the UW campus, but actually in the broader North Seattle area. The crows all know that this one mask is bad. I feed them at work, and so they can recognize me very, very easily. It can be
so they basically decide that given human face is good for the crows or bad for the crows,
yeah.
And then they respond favorably or negatively to that face and somehow socially transmit that to other crows.
Yep. And a year ago, a friend of mine and I rescued a baby crow, and we put on disguises for that because we didn't want the parents to think that we didn't want the parents to recognize us and in the future and attack us essentially.
So
why would rescuing a baby crow?
They don't know we're rescuing it. They just think
Wow.
we're taking it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this was one that had a damaged wing and couldn't fly and needed to be rehabbed. And so, as far as they were concerned, we were taking their baby.
So one of the really interesting things that I think is implied with this, and I'm sure there has to have been work done, is that there is a specific part of the human brain specifically in charge of, for lack of a better term, identifying human faces, the fusiform gyrus and the temporal lobe. And there is a specific disease or condition called prosopagnosia where you cannot recognize faces. Right. And so I wonder if there is any type of I have no idea what a crow brain looks like, but I wonder if there is some type of something that can be learned, or if this is just a complete kind of divergent evolution where both sides have humans have developed one ways of recognizing faces through this particular neural network and delegation of neurons, and crows of something completely different. Do you know anything about that?
I know a little bit about it. John Marsloff is working on this. He's actually been putting crows in the scanner. And
I was going to say, let's do some fMRIs. I'm always up for
He's been doing fMRIs on crows, as it turns out. And unfortunately, I should be able to give you a better accounting of everything he's figured out. My brain turns off when I hear about these different parts of brains and the things that light up at scanners, and so I honestly don't remember what the hell he found.
I have mixed feelings on fMRIs, but it is compelling. In something like this, it would just be fun just to see what happens.
Absolutely, and it's not, and I don't even mean that. I mean, of course, there are plenty of reasons to be skeptical as well, but I don't even mean that as skepticism. It just has something to do with what I, have managed to find interesting.
I understand totally. So the other thing about crows, right, is it's just they're amazingly smart at solving puzzles and making tools and all of this, and people discovered
and smarter than other birds.
Massively, not even close. Smarter than the vast majority of primates in terms of solving puzzles and creating tools. And so people discovered. Alex Kostelnik and others discovered 20 years ago that the New Caledonian crows were remarkable tool makers. When the crows essentially did an end run on an experiment that he was trying to do, he was trying to figure out if they could pick the appropriate tool for the task. But there was Abel and Betty were the two crows there, and Abel would. Abel was a bit of a bully, and so not only could Abel pick the right tool for the task, but Abel would confiscate it and not share it. And so Betty was like, "Screw this," and made her own. And then they were like, "Whoa, did that just happen?" And then they kept checking it, and again over and over, they would make her own tools that she needed, and this has become well documented behavior with these guys. We thought that they were fairly unusual in that tool making capacity until people raising Alala, the Hawaiian crow, observed this species making tools to get little pieces of food that have fallen out of their cage as part of the conservation effort. So this is actually quite a remarkable example of why conservation is so important. We've got this sort of convergent evolution between corvids and primates, certain primates that in terms of the ability to fashion tools, and we just have a couple of instances on each branch. And because we managed to preserve the alala, at least in captivity, and they're being reintroduced now. Now we've got another instance on this corvid branch of a highly skilled tool-making species.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Ben.
So I have a very serious news you can use crow question. It seems to me that if we all have a choice in life between being a person who the crows think is good for the crows and being a person that all the crows are saying don't hang out with Wittes or mob him when he leaves his house because he's bad for the crows.
Yeah.
I want to be on the right side of the crows.
Yeah.
How do I do it?
Well, don't piss them off for starters.
But
I don't pick fights with crows, so I'm not worried about pissing them off. But I want to actively, when I leave the house, I want all the crows to say to one another, "Hey, that guy, he's on the side of the crows.
Yeah,
like he's a good guy. I want them to if I want them to swarm my enemies." So how can I teach the crows
little flying monkeys
that I'm good for the crows?
Feed them. Absolutely. It's they love peanuts. Bring them peanuts. Bring them a few peanuts in the shell. Toss that down for them. They'll be delighted.
In the shell.
In the shell. Yeah, they love the shells. It's fun to take the shells off. I think that's
okay.
And they can spot them and they have fun with that and so on. I was watching. So the crows will kind of do these big staging events where they come and they land all together in a big group and make a ton of noise before they fly off to the mass roost, and they roost in these enormous groups. There's one up in Bothell here. I was there a couple of nights ago. So maybe 20,000 birds came in that night. It was amazing. I can
a lot of birds.
I can show you some pictures, but anyway.
Please do.
Okay,
do they poop on people on purpose?
What's that?
I'm wondering if they're so smart. I'm wondering what their weapons are.
I'm not convinced that they poop on people on purpose. Some people claim that they've seen people do bad things to crows and they poop, but I haven't seen that one nailed down scientifically yet. So they do this staging and it was really fun. It was I was watching this happen in the neighborhood, and this guy came out, and there were maybe 500 crows on his roof, and I'd been talking to them and taking pictures of them, and they and this guy came out and started shouting at me. He was furious, and he was convinced that I had summoned these crows, and he was going to call the police on me.
Can you in fact summon crows? You've been feeding them.
I can summon 10. I can't summon 500. But I was really torn because I actually really wanted to get booked into jail on the charges of summoning crows. I didn't want to stay around with somebody completely crazy to have this encounter. And then somebody pointed out that I'd probably be charged with inciting a murder anyway.
Excellent. I see what you did there.
Yeah. But it's a true story.
I was gonna make a joke about you actually wouldn't it be more like being a witch or something, and they'd have to see if you floated like a duck or
That's probably. But I would be. It would be an amazing thing to be able to do if you could get that many to come.
I think that
I will have a
to
dozen
do
follow
that.
me around campus all the time, but that's a separate thing. Yeah. Well, how do I share the screen here?
So if you go to the top of your picture, of where you are, there should be a little menu that drops down.
Share screen. Let me.
And then you can pick between application and everything else, so you can share your screen.
Let me pull up a little window here, and I'll show you some of these guys.
Can we have a conversation at some point about grackles and where they fall in kind of the
I need to get Karina Logan on here. Karina studies this.
Oh really? I wasn't going to say good things about grackles. They
No,
steal,
she's
they like
Korean
swarm
bird.
my bird feeders and scare away all of my songbirds. Ooh,
Korean,
wow. What a
I think I might have
picture.
the wrong one. What are you seeing? You're seeing a. Oh, okay. I see what you're seeing. Let's see. How can I get? Sorry, I'm just
You
figuring
can
out.
X out of it in the upper left corner.
God, no. I think we're good. What I wanted to show you, I wanted to just show you a picture from the Roost. This is not taken last night. This is taken. This is actually taken during the Super. Whoops. Let's go to that one.
Wow.
That's actually taken during the Super Bowl. But
Wow.
but that's the Roost, and so you get these thousands of birds coming in. It's really quite remarkable. You go there and you think they're not going to come, and you think they're not going to come, and then when you're about to head home, they just all arrive in mass and descend.
I've never seen the birds, but now I kind of feel like I have to. Like,
Yeah.
is that a good? I don't know. Isn't that one of the bad Hitchcocks? I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
It's a pretty good movie. No,
Really?
I think it's. But the birds aren't real birds. They're just like any horror movie villain.
Yeah, right.
It's not. It has nothing to do with actual birds. So I think you need to work on your ability to summon crows so that you can summon this group of crows.
This would be a remarkable skill. That would be. I'd like to, I think, be able to summon them onto the internet these days, because I've been trying to deal with, large.
What if we sent these crows to the White House?
So forth. Some to the White House would be good. Yeah. I can say all kinds of inappropriate things. I'll just hold my tongue.
We don't have inappropriate things on In Lieu of Fun, but you can. But I'll say we can send them to the White House for you.
That seems like a good idea. But they are
beautiful.
So for people who are not wise to the ways of corvids, what distinguishes corvids from other birds, and what birds are in the family of corvids?
Okay, so corvids are one particular branch of songbirds. They are there are a few kind of morphological distinctions. One of the ones that you can see very clearly in this picture are the we're called the rick bristles. They're these they're the sort of mustache that this thing has over the top of its beak, covering the top of the beak there. They have large brains. They're very intelligent. They're generalists, and so the corvids would be basically ravens and crows and magpies and chuffs, and that's pretty much your stock corvids there.
And why do they like shiny objects? Do we have any sense of that?
Why do they
like shiny objects?
I don't know why they like shiny objects. There are so many.
They're Taylor Swift groupies.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much mythology about this as well. I have a, and there seems to be some truth to it. So I have a good friend, Chris Sujikawa, who's taught me a ton about crow photography. She's the best crow photographer I know, and she has this amazing picture of a crow that has found a wedding ring and is strutting around in the grass with a wedding ring. And she's a true naturalist, because instead of I would have run screaming at the bird and tried to get the ring, but she just sat there and took pictures, which was fantastic. But this is an old story. There are so many folk stories and myths about crows bringing rings and shiny objects. And in fact, one story, which I've forgotten the details about, involved an early king in Hungary who was, involved imprisonment in a tower and a ring, and that a raven brought to send a message that somebody was still alive. And now in Budapest, you can see a statue of this guy at the gates of the of one of the palace buildings, and so on. And so there's a lot of truth to so much of the story that we tell around corvids. So we had an interesting Kate, you mentioned this interesting thing about how birds can see in all these different colors, right?
We wanted to do that. Can I show this video? Because
why don't you show the video? Though it's bullshit, but go ahead and show it.
It is.
Yeah, so this is a great transition from crows and birds to calling bullshit.
So let me just I'm just
gonna make sure that it's like, I'm just gonna close my.
I already did it, Carl.
Okay. Okay.
Let me share my screen really quickly. Applicate Chrome tab. Okay. There we go. Can you guys see it? This is
We can now.
So the tweet was basically like, most birds are tetrachromats and can see into the UV range, and it's unfair that we can't see all their markings like they can. And so like the person that sent me this was like, you would love this. This would be so cool. You would be super into it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of like interesting. I guess it is true that like birds are that. I don't really understand what's happening in this video, but I flagged it for us to talk about today. And then interestingly, just to catch everyone kind of up, well, you can say your response, obviously, Carl, which I think is super relevant.
I think the other one's even more interesting. So
but it also turns out that like someone in the, and I'll just like close out of this now, someone in the comments to my thing said, this is a fake video. This is actually a Chinese like racing pigeon that has had fluorescent paint applied to its feathers and its wings in order to like, and so like, which matches with what your observation was, Carl, which is like, yes, maybe they can see in chromatics, but there's like what they're doing with a fluorescent light in that video does not in any way demonstrate why humans can't see that. And so kind of like this very, and so it turns out that the video is like a fake video, is a widely debunked video. It is in fact like just like someone had painted the wings and does this thing. And well, let's put it this way. The video itself appears to be, it doesn't have sound, appears to be a real video of a pigeon somewhere. Yeah. It is a completely real video. There's no deep fakes on pigeons or something like happening in this video. This is like something that's interesting about what I study. What is false about the video is the information that has become attached to it through the tweet. And so what's fake about the video is that the person who's tweeting out this video is saying that this is what this video stands for, and the video does not stand for that at all. And you have to have a pretty sophisticated sense of science, and I think, and science and kind of questioning your priors, questioning authority. People like the video is going viral, so it seems like everyone's believing it, right? Like It's not like it's just like disappearing. And so like you have this whole book out. You're like in this particular instance, again, this is the Venn diagram. I feel like with this video today, it was like your interest in ornithology and your interest in fake news have convened on this video. And they have. Yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
So, I mean, first of all, yes, absolutely. It was really, really interesting to think about and study the way that fake information is transmitted across the internet. And I want to make sure y'all can still hear me because we're having some internet difficulty.
No, you're great. You're good.
Okay, great.
We hear you just fine.
So, okay, fantastic. So this is a very common thing where you'll have a real picture or a real video that then gets presented in a different way. We saw a lot of this during, for example, during early on in COVID. Before COVID really turned, was clearly a worldwide pandemic. In January, we were seeing a lot of misinformation around COVID spreading across the internet, largely around conspiracies that China was he had either engineered the virus, which is false, or that there were hundreds of thousands of deaths there being covered up, which is also false. And often, what would be used would be videos from other events, even in different years or different countries, and then they would be tagged with this little story about COVID. Here are soldiers shooting people in the street because they have COVID, or something like that. And so it's a very common pattern we see in the spread of internet misinformation on social media, and that's been something I've really been focused on for the last few years is trying to understand how misinformation spreads through networks. I've been working on network theory for a while, and then understanding this sort of new information.
Say more for a second about what network theory is, at least in like the area that you're studying. Yes.
Sure. I mean, I got into network theory because I was actually trying to. I mean, this stuff all comes in big circles because I got into network theory because I was studying epidemics and wanted to understand how epidemics spread and epidemics.
That's not a good research agenda. It kind of sounds like you should stick with crows. Stay away from epidemics. Like they're over.
There's nothing there. No, I know. Yeah. So, so I was interested in tracing, in thinking about the way that epidemics actually move through social networks of people through their direct contacts, rather than exactly in geographic space or something like that, in a way that long distance transportation networks impact the spread of epidemics worldwide, and ended up working on that for a while, developing a bunch of methods that have become sort of kind of standard tools in network theory for understanding the structure of very big networks. And then started watching what was going on, on social media. I had this background studying, again, coming back to the birds, studying, animal communication and deception and misinformation in animal communication, and so this, struck me as an extremely interesting opportunity to watch misinformation spreading in the social sphere on the same kinds of networks I've been thinking about and studying, and so that sort of pulled me in that direction. And that was one of the main things I was working on when COVID hit, and then it was, at first I was tracking misinformation, and then once we found ourselves in the middle of a full-blown pandemic crisis, then I kind of sort of set the misinformation aside. My colleagues at the Center for the Informed Public here at the UW are working hard on that aspect of it, and I've just been doing just straightforward COVID epidemiology, 80 hours a week since February. And that's kind of the circling around there.
So help me out. You've got a lot of themes going on there. You're a biologist by background.
Yeah. I love this.
But you're doing epidemiology, which is not really a branch of biology.
And he doesn't like talking about brains, Ben.
And you're right. You're not into fMRIs.
No, I can't remember the front and the back parts, what they're called.
Yeah, there's got all these lobes and
there's up parts and down parts, and it's really confusing.
There's up parts and down parts. Yeah, that's true.
So, what is your academic research in? Like, you're actually a professor of biology. It sounds like, is all of this your day job, or do you have this other day job where you actually do academic biology?
I'm going to
do a little bit of academic biology as well. I'm really interested in, again, everything I do circles around themes of information and how it flows through natural systems and through social systems. And so I do some stuff on how information is acquired by natural selection. The natural selection you can think of as a kind of a learning process. It may not be a very efficient one, or actually, as we argue, it may be quite an efficient one. And so if you think about your genome is full of information that tells your body what proteins to make, when to make them, et cetera, how to develop limbs and all of that. And then you can ask, well, how did that information get there? And if you're not a creationist, you're probably going to say it got there through the process of evolution by natural selection. So what are the rules by which evolution through natural selection acquires information? We write down the mathematical laws that describe how that process operates. So that's sort of that's the closest day job biology that I do. But an awful lot of what I've been doing for a number of years is working on a whole host of problems across the natural and social sciences. So I was trained as a mathematical population biologist, but did postdoctoral work in epidemiology. Was doing a combination of epidemiology and evolution, looking at how evolutionary change brings basically how evolutionary change leads to pandemics like the one we're seeing now, where you have a novel disease coming out of an animal species, and then spent a lot of time thinking about networks in general, and just and of course when you start to think about networks and you start to look for data that you can experiment with and study, and one beautiful data set of networks is the citation network of all papers that have ever been written, and so we were able to get access to that, and started working on that, and got me thinking about how science works. And I mean, one's ideas just kind of flow, or one's interests just flow from topic to topic. It's one of the really nice things about being a theoretician, is that you're not wedded to some empirical system that you've spent 15 years learning how to do, and $3 million of grant money setting up. And so you can just kind of follow your interests as they go. But I guess that's sort of what happens to me.
All right, we got. Sorry.
Can I circle back to one quick thing about conspiracies?
By all means.
And misinformation and all of that, and then we'll And so I just wanted to say I saw the coolest thing a few days ago. I was actually on the phone doing an interview with Ed Yong, and I was sitting in my front chair, and I look out, and there's this amazing sight of enormous birds circling very, very high. They later calculated that they were almost a mile high, without flapping, and they're white, and they would disappear, and they would appear again. And it was a flock of white pelicans, which aren't supposed to be here in Seattle at all. But we've seen a lot of birds up here, especially this summer, that shouldn't be here. That should be only further south. It was an amazing thing to see. I hung up on Ed. Ed was very gracious about it. Ran outside, took a bunch of pictures. You can find them on my Twitter feed. But here's my theory based on some comments that people gave to me on Twitter. I've been following this spring, during the Black Lives Matter protests and so forth, these rumors about the government flying at high altitude swarms of 30 to 50 drones over the protests along the West Coast. And watching these things in the sky, they don't flap ever, and they fly in perfect formation in a way that you've never seen birds fly. They're just absolutely synchronized. And so I have this new, it's a meta conspiracy theory, I guess, but it's my new meta conspiracy theory is that at least some of these sightings of government drones at high altitude, and these things shimmer, they look metallic when they're way up there, are actually white pelicans. So anyway, just wanted to close that loop. And now turn back to whatever you.
Jim McGuckin, the floor is yours.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Carl, I don't want to be a down guy because this crow stuff is so much more fun. And, these guys have taught me to have fun, not be too serious. At any rate, I do want to ask a question. Are you involved with the IHME group?
Only as one of their harshest critics.
Harshest critics? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, fair enough. And so the bottom line I just was wondering about is I gather, and I modeled a lot when I was an economist, I've retired now, but how much adaptive behavior is in that model, or is it just purely empirical curves, so to speak?
So I haven't been.
So wait, but before you answer that, tell us what the IMHE group is and what it does, and why you're a critic of it.
IHME is Institution for Health Metrics and Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. It's a large research institute here at the University of Washington. They developed one of the early models of COVID-19 dynamics and what we expected to happen with the pandemic. One of the sort of key things that they did that no one else had done was to try to estimate hospital demand, which was a really important thing that we had to figure out early on, was whether the hospitals were going to get overrun, and they made a good faith effort at doing that. They made a bunch of modeling choices that I didn't like at all. Because they developed these very highly empirical model with no underlying mechanism at all. What they said is, "Hey, look, I'm going to simplify this a little bit, but not very much. Hey, look, the curves. There's these old ideas in epidemiology that go back over 100 years that epidemics usually follow vaguely Gaussian curves over time in terms of the number of people infected." And hey, look, that sure is what it looks like in Wuhan, and then later in Italy. So let's take what's happening in the U.S. and let's model what's happening in the U.S. as a Gaussian. So if we look at the sort of early upswing, if that were a Gaussian, then from that early upswing, from that second derivative, you could actually infer the timing and height of the epidemic peak, and then you'd expect it to drop back down. And so they took a whole bunch of data, and then you can sort of anchored it to the Wuhan and Italy data. They took all this data and they used that to try to sort of calibrate the U.S. data and then predict when the peak was going to occur and how high the peak was going to be and all of that. And so that was purely empirical, no mechanism, no notion of transmission between sensitive and susceptible individuals and infected individuals or anything like that. Just straight up exercise in curve fitting. That model got the ear of the White House and was the one that Deborah Birx was presenting back when they were doing daily campaign rallies blended with press conferences on COVID. And so unfortunately, that model missed by a very, very long mark. According to the earlier iterations of that model, the COVID should be completely gone by now. I think the upper bound on deaths in the U.S. was 110 or maybe 130,000, and so on. So they didn't build in any of the behavior. They didn't think about these sort of feedbacks about how when people start to feel like the pandemic is going away, then they start to relax their precautions and any of that kind of stuff. And so the model missed, for some combination of reasons, partly because it was ridiculous to fit a Gaussian in the first place, and partly because they didn't include those kind of behavioral elements. They've since updated the model many times, and I haven't done a very good job of keeping up with what's happened in each subsequent update. I was just thinking about this earlier today, and I think that my suspicion is it's probably still not baking in enough of the behavioral side. But honestly, I haven't. It sort of dropped out of favor at some point. At some point, their predictions became lower than what was actually happening, so they were no longer convenient to trot around, because you couldn't say, look, we've been a marvelous success, because we were actually doing worse than the models predicted, and at that point, they disappeared from the White House press conferences.
All right, Tony Cava.
Tony,
you have the helm. The floor is yours.
I've got a.
And just before you start, I'm just telling you all, the poll is in the field.
Okay. I've got a stellar here looking for a handout, so I'm going to feed the little guy. I was hoping to get him on camera, but this is how you make bird
I should
friends,
mention.
Ben.
I should mention really
that,
quickly that Tony is also in Washington, so you guys should, I don't know, in the before times, you might run into each other.
Yes. I was asking Carl about the pelicans and is it the Caspian terns we have up here, or Arctic terns?
Caspians are the common ones.
Yeah, they're cool. So I had a couple questions, one about info and one about birds. Would you like one or the other, or both?
Let's start with birds. We've been talking info. Let's hit birds.
Oh, okay. The bird question is about crow funerals. I have never seen one. I'm wondering if they're real, and if they are, if you could walk us through the behavior. And is it a real funeral, or are we just projecting that onto the crows?
Awesome question. You should look at. There's a Twitter account if you're on Twitter, Corvid at Corvid Research. This is Kaylee Swift's Twitter account, and she's a PhD biologist who wrote her PhD dissertation on crow funerals, and did these amazing experiments looking at crow funerals. And so I think it's a crow funeral is a real what we call is a crow funeral. Yeah, you've got to get Kaylee on. She's amazing. That would be much more interesting than getting on, and she's fantastic. There's some great stories and so on. So a crow funeral, I mean, it's a real phenomenon. It's something they really do. I've seen it. And I mean, you can get people on here that say they've seen UFOs, so that doesn't matter. But I have seen it. And but I think, is it a funeral in the sense of an organized memorial for the life of that particular crow? Probably not. Right? It's probably and Kaylee. We should let Kaylee answer this. But my thought would be that it probably has something to do with trying to learn in an organized communal way about the hazards that are out there, and something has gotten this crow, and everyone wants to, the other crows are going to come around, and they're going to, look at what happened and make a ruckus about it, and then they fly off. But Kaylee could tell you the story much better than I can.
What role is that playing in crow life? I mean, it has to have been evolutionarily selected for, presumably. What's the role that it's playing?
I mean, it could be purely cultural. Probably it's evolutionary selected for. What it's doing, I suppose, is it's helping them learn about their environment and how to stay safe in their environment. I mean, this is something that we as humans do all the time too. I mean, this is why there's so much bullshit that goes flying around the internet around COVID, is because we're all kind of attuned to risks and thinking about the things that we could possibly do to keep ourselves safe, whether it's injecting bleach or whatever it may be. Crows are also generalists, and they're very, very social, like we are. They're like us in those two ways. They explore their environment. They learn how to extract a wide range of food resources in their environment, instead of having a beak that can just eat one kind of seed or something. And then they're highly social, and so then they use their intelligence in this social fashion as well. And so my suspicion is that this is helping them learn about the nature of the dangers in their environment, which, given the distribution of crows, is ranges enormously. I mean, there are some places where where crows have to worry about lions, and there are some places that crows have to worry about house cats, and there are some places where the crows have to worry about people with shotguns, and so they have to figure out what are the local threats. And I suspect this is part of what's going on there.
So
Kate?
on that, well, I guess kind of to follow up on Tony's question about the funerals. I guess there is the question of kind of that John Bordeaux has brought up in the thing about the necrophilia in crows, apparently, that is widely documented. I will just say that what's interesting to me about this, about the necrophilia, and it's also I used to have chickens, and I was just saying in the chat that my chicken's favorite food was chicken. That there was so it was cannibalism, but there was no social constraint around it, and cannibalism generally is just not actually a thing of social and I'm okay. So my question is twofold. One, how do we develop these types of I would say socially normative behaviors around shame and guilt and disgust around something like cannibalism, as humans? And then also why do things like necrophilia exist in crows to kind of echo Ben's question, is how does this advance the species? What is happening here? Why is that a thing that's actually still that is still done or appearing?
Yeah, so I mean, again, Kaylee can tell you a lot more about necrophilia in crows than I can, because I think that's really her discovery.
Really? She discovered that?
Yeah, I think she was the first to accurately document that. Yeah, I mean, I think
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, there may have. Yeah, I think she wrote.
So she's the Jane Goodall of crows, is what
she's
you're
the
telling
Jane
me.
Goodall of crows.
Okay.
With necrophilia and funerals.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure that
the goth
Jane
Jane Goodall of
actually
crows,
also
maybe.
documented such disturbing behavior, but yes.
Yeah. So no, she would be absolutely great for that. Let's see. So how do we develop those taboos? Boy, I don't know. I mean, it's there are all of these stories in anthropology about how that happens. Presumably you're using that social conformity apparatus to help deter behaviors that have turned out to be detrimental in the long term. And so there's stories about the cannibalism taboo helping you avoid prion diseases and things like that. But you have to get a real anthropologist on. I'm just bullshitting. It's just.
All right, so here's a question. I like
that you're calling bullshit on yourself, Carl, by the way.
Yeah, you have to.
We have a complaint in the chat that we have had too much crow in this show and not enough bullshit.
Okay.
So my question is, in your judgment, is the balance of bullshit and crow in this show too much crow, too little crow, too much bullshit, too little bullshit, or about right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a little biased because I've been doing way too many podcasts about bullshit, because we just published this book, and then you've got to do all these podcasts, especially when the whole world is shut down and you can't do a book tour or anything like that.
And there's a lot of bullshit to talk about.
There's a lot of bullshit, and so for me, it's a blast to get to talk crow. But all right, well, let's talk a little bit of bullshit before we have to wrap up, because I think it would be unfair of us to invite you on and not
hawk your book.
Oh, don't
so
hawk
what
my
is no? Well, what is calling bullshit about? What's the basic argument, and how is it different from the other disinformation books that are out there?
So, I mean, the book comes out of a course that we taught at the University of Washington. I started teaching 4 years ago, 3 years, almost 4 years ago. Jevin West and I. Jevin's a professor in the information school. And it got its start because Jevin is sort of the architect of the data science curriculum here at the University of Washington. And at some point, he called me up and said, "Hey, Carl, I'm going to teach a course on big data." And I sort of immediately responded, "Okay, then I'm going to have to teach a course calling bullshit on big data because I'm, a skeptic of the hype." And Jevin started laughing and said, "Hey, I'd teach that with you." And I said, "You serious?" And he said, "Yeah, hell yeah." And so we started thinking about what would go into a course about how big data was bullshit and hype. And we quickly realized that limiting that to big data was completely unfair, and that we needed to extend that to the misuse of all kinds of quantitative information, statistics, and just the use of facts and figures and numbers and all of that. And so what the book is really about is about how we're all fairly facile at picking up, what we call old school bullshit, which is weasel words from a corporate spokesman, or the politician's promises, or the essay that you write in high school at midnight after not reading the novel that it's about, or whatever. But we're much less facile, most of us, I think all of us really, in picking up bullshit that takes quantitative form and puts on these sort of, the authority of numbers. And for a few reasons, partly because numbers feel very, they feel objective, they feel like they come direct from nature, and partly because we're often loath to challenge things we don't completely understand. So if someone's talking about using some kind of fancy type of regression, and I don't remember exactly what that is, then I sometimes think, well, I shouldn't really, even speak up here because I don't remember the details. And so the book is about how that's a mistake, and it's about how, because the world has become so quantified in 2020 with our embedded sensors everywhere and our constant tracking devices that we carry in our pockets and the Internet of Things and all of that, decisions are based more and more on quantitative information, and information is conveyed to the public in the media more and more in quantitative form. And there's just as much latitude to bullshit and to spin your own story and such with numbers as there are with words. And you don't
damn lies, and statistics, as
that
the
kind
old
of story,
saying
right?
goes.
And you don't need to be masters. You don't need to have a master's degree in stats or machine learning or anything else to be able to see through this. Because all you have to really do is sort of look at the information that's going into whatever the apparatus is, say, they're using these data to try to make a decision. Are these data reasonable? To sort of give you an example with COVID, right? You've got those doctors in Bakersfield who tried to argue that the infection fatality rate in California was very, very low. How did they do that? They looked at the patients who came to the clinic that they owned, or the clinics that they owned, and they looked at what fraction of the patients coming into their clinics during the pandemic had COVID. And then they extrapolated from those patients to everyone in the state of California. And they said, wow, there must be a shit ton of people in California with COVID. Mm-hmm. And therefore the infection fatality rate has to actually be really low because there haven't been all that many deaths. Well, you don't have to know about the statistics that they did to do this, to see this is ridiculous. Why do you go to the urgent care clinic, the only place in Bakersfield that has tests, during the middle of a pandemic? You go either because you've hurt yourself in some sort of traumatic accident, or because you want to get a COVID test. And so, of course, that population is, self-selecting. Exactly. There's a massive selection bias there. And so, the point, that's the theme of the book, is to sort of say you need to be able to say, turn on your bullshit detector for this numeric stuff, and don't be intimidated by the fact that people are using algorithms and machine learning and stats and things that you may not understand, because the bullshit is almost never actually in the sort of statistical black box. It's almost always in the information you put in, or in the way you interpret the numbers that come out.
Yeah, to put it in numerical terms, almost nobody's nature of bullshit is to say 2 + 2 = 5. Their bullshit is to say is in whether they're putting 2 in the first place, right?
Yeah,
it's an accessible. It's not usually the math that's the bullshit. It's the analysis of the math.
It's right. It's the selection of the data, or it's the other thing we see all the time, of course, is are making these mistakes of leaping from correlations to causality and things like that, right? So you have correlative evidence, and then you say, oh, people who exercise, this was a big example recently, people who exercise more are less likely to get cancer. And that was an observational study. But what all the newspapers said is, want to avoid cancer, run 4 times a week, which there's no evidence.
I have one more question that I've just got to ask you because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
How often, given the number of times in the last hour that you have said these 2 words, and that they're exactly 1 letter apart, how often do you say COVID when you mean Corvid, or Corvid when you mean COVID?
It's a good question. And it gets at kind of, I think, different linguistic processing modules. I almost never make the spoken mistake, but I make it commonly when I type.
That's interesting.
So, yeah. Kate, you could tell me what part of my brain is fucking that up.
I could.
Well, I think we should also ask, how many of your podcasts about calling bullshit have you been asked that question?
This is the first.
All right, that's on in lieu of fun. We have broken news with Carl Bergstrom. We've gotten him to admit that he sometimes confuses diseases and birds when typing, but almost never when speaking.
So I have a quick question, which is kind of like about numeracy, and then another question that is about kind of your calling bullshit theory, which I haven't read the book, so I should read it before I do this. That being stated. One is, I think that some of what you're talking about is people see the shininess of algorithms, they see the shininess of math, and they see the shininess of science, and they are quantitative science in particular, and they are innumerate, and they are basically they just get taken in by it. So that's one problem. And then I think that there's the problem that you kind of talk about how we learn as a species to start identifying, you gave the example, how do you tell that a 7th grader wrote this at 1 o'clock in the morning without having read the book and only reading the Cliff Notes? How do you know that this is a salesman? And the thing that I want to point out is that invariably those 2 examples, a lot of people probably get taken in by the salesman, and a lot of people probably get taken in by the kid, or are not certain enough in their judgment that the kid plagiarize some Cliff's Notes to give them an F. They give them a C, right? And so there's some type of but my point here is kind of I would say from my cognitive neuroscience background that this is a story of pattern recognition and understanding patterns and learning over time and updating priors. And from a Bayesian point of view, this is exactly what's happening. But is that what you basically argue in the book? I don't know yet because I haven't read it.
I mean, we are a little bit more practical about the advice we give, I think, we talk a little bit in the book about the deep history of deception, and we talk about ravens and how ravens deceive and things like that. As we move forward in the book, we really sort of are thinking more about just describing the kinds of misinformation that are out there and the kinds of fallacies that are out there and how to spot them. What you point out is really interesting because it also hints at the fact that there's this ongoing arms race as I try to learn the patterns of the ways that if I'm that people BS me, then people are changing those patterns over time to get around what it is that I've learned. And so that's
that's precisely, not only is that the way that not only is that what you're doing as a consumer, but that's what technology platforms and the companies are trying to do in terms of spam, in terms of spam is probably the best example. But yes, everything that you said, it's a really interesting point.
I mean, what the tech companies are trying to do, and it's an enormous problem.
Whoa. Did we just lose Carl?
I don't know. I
think we did.
No.
He's frozen.
Is it the Pelican drones?
I
don't know. What? There he's back.
Okay.
You froze for a moment.
You froze for 1 second.
Oh, goodness. Sorry. So all I was going to say is that these tech platforms have been designed to maximize engagement, not to maximize informativeness or accuracy or anything else like that. So when you're on Facebook or Twitter or anything else, there's the companies are just trying to get your attention in some sense, with disregard for the truth or factual accuracy. So in the book, we define bullshit as language, statistical figures, data graphics, and other forms of presentation that are intended to persuade by impressing or overwhelming a reader with a blatant disregard for truth or logical coherence. And if you think about the UX of social media, the social media platforms are enormous bullshitters because they are trying to keep our attention glued to those platforms with a blatant disregard for the truth or coherence of what it is that we're actually reading. And I think that's turning out to be, in some ways, I honestly think an existential threat to democracy because it's fundamentally changed the way that information flows through democracy.
Yeah.
We are going to leave it there.
Not to end.
Excellent endpoint.
With democracy in peril, but peanuts in their shells for the corvids.
Peanuts in the shells, and you know what? When we're all gone, they're still going to be here, and thinking, God, where did those stupid monkeys go?
And they're gonna remember the ones whose faces gave them peanuts, and the ones whose faces menaced them, and they're gonna repeat it through the generations. That Bergstrom character was okay, but watch out for Wittes. And so you gotta ask yourself: do you want to be Bergstrom in this Crow discussion, or do you want to be Wittes? I want to be Bergstrom, so I'm going to go out and get myself some peanuts and feed the birds. Carl Bergstrom, you're a great American. Thank you for joining us. And Kate, who is joining us tomorrow?
Emily Bazelon.
My old friend and neighbor, Emily Bazelon, who, as far as I know, does not feed crows, but does write excellent stuff for the New York Times Magazine about criminal justice and other legal issues, and is of course, for many of you, a voice on the Slate Political Gabfest, along with John Dickerson and David Plotz, and is a thoroughly lovely person and enjoyable to talk to. So that will be tomorrow, and that will happen exactly 22 hours and 52 minutes from now, barring the intercession of further tech issues, which of course are more probable than not. And until then, we don't have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, you can decide whether you want to be an enemy of the crows or a friend of the crows.
Don't be an enemy of the crows.
Don't be an enemy.
And that is entirely up to you.
It's true.
See you tomorrow.
All right. Thanks so much. It was